I feel like I'm about to do like a school assignment. I feel like I just read a book for class and I'm gonna like do a project on it. Before we get into the book review though, look behind me. We have introduced some groovy ghosts because my background needed to be more groovy. Little less Stranger Things, a little bit more groovy ghosts. So we got a bunch of ghosts back there. Hope you all enjoy that. But yes, you read the title of this video. This is going to be my review of The Only Band in the World by Ryan Bird. Now this book is essentially a collection of interviews as well as some commentary and a little bit of like album reviews that Ryan Bird has done over the years. Now I am going to go through all of the chapters in this book as well as my thoughts on the book, but I will not be going into every single detail because there's just so much. Like, it's not a huge book, but there's so much information packed onto this, it's insane. I would be here all day. But I will be going over the main highlights of each chapter. And you know, my commentary and such. Because this is a book review, people. And also, I don't want to spoil this because this was a limited run. Unfortunately, they sold out pretty quick. But I did hear that Ryan is maybe possibly releasing some paperbacks in like October or November-ish. But I don't want to get on here and spoil the entire thing for people who actually want to read this thing. So I'll just be going over the highlights. Alright, without any further ado, let's get into this thing. Now, the beginning and ending of this book, there are actually notes from Tyler and Josh. Josh did the foreword, Tyler did the afterword. And of course, this is a lot of them talking about how great Ryan is. But both of them mention this idea of us reading this book and feeling like we know them better. That was their main goal, for us to read this and feel like we understand them more as people. And I feel like that was totally achieved, and this is coming from MTV's biggest fan. I know everything about them. Not in like a creepy way, of course. In like a totally normal way. But obviously, being a fan and just seeing what they want to share with us, you only get so much detail. It was really cool to really get into the minds of both of them, both what they think of this entire phenomenon and also the writing process of their albums. You really do walk away from this feeling like you do have more insight on them, which is really, really cool. And of course, a massive appeal for any fan who loves the band. Now, the introduction part of this book talks about Ryan seeing 21 Pilots for the first time. And what seemed to catch his attention the most was just the energy in the room. And I totally agree with this. I feel like 21 Pilots Live is unmatched as far as the energy in the room. I don't know what it is, but no other concert feels like a 21 Pilots concert. Ryan also honed in on the fact that both the band and the fans are very, very dedicated to each other. He even referred to the band as being their people, and they are always looking to be there and present with their people. There was a really interesting part where he realized that every person in the crowd knew every lyric to every song. He began to understand that this was not an exception, that this was a rule, that this level of dedication was pretty normal in the fan base. And yes, I agree, the dedication the fans and both the band have with each other is something very unique. Like, yes, of course the fans are dedicated, but the band is also dedicated in making the fans happy. But the introduction also explains to us how the book got its name. Ryan had asked one of the concert goers if they believed that 21 Pilots had the possibility of being one of the best bands in the world, to which the concert goer replied, "They are going to be the only band in the world." And obviously this struck a chord with Ryan since he named the book after this interaction. Chapter 1 is called Leaders of the New World Order. And a lot of this chapter goes into the importance of Columbus, how both Tyler and Josh have never been ashamed of where they come from, and they actually like staying in Ohio. That's crazy. Who wants to willingly stay in Ohio? That's crazy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I got family out in Ohio. I love Ohio. It's okay. But this goes into the band understanding of how important Columbus is to the band, how Columbus is an influential part in everything that they do. And I always thought that it was cool that the band loved their hometown so much. I can't say that I'm the same way, but it's really, really cool that they just love where they come from. They love Ohio. Ryan also talks about the cultural phenomenon that is 21 Pilots that Tyler and Josh seem to be unaware of. A huge theme in this book is their level of like just being humble. It's very fascinating to me that they can achieve all of this and there's like Yeah, we're just two boys from Ohio. But this chapter also dives into the honesty that 21 Pilots want to put into their art. The honesty in 21 Pilots is one of the reasons why they're one of my favorite bands and why I stuck around for so long. The honesty in their lyrics is what drew me in to begin with, but as I stayed around, I began to realize that honesty is a huge part of not only their art, but who they are as people. I think musicians and kind of celebrities alike package their lives in a very particular way. They want you to think like, oh, I'm this big pop star, I'm this big rock star, my life is perfect. And while that is cool to some degree, it's not very relatable. And surely Tyler and Josh's life are not like mine's or like a regular person's by any degree, but it's still cool that they are able to recognize that they don't live a perfect life and they are willing to share that honesty with us. This chapter also dived into the audience's reaction to this honesty and how they always kind of feel like they have to respond to that honesty. I think there is something to that because obviously the clique is a place where people are able to share their struggles. You know, I've seen posts online where someone is very open about their current life situation, and there's so many that are willing to not only help but also share their own experiences. And I do think that willingness to be honest and open does come from the band themselves being honest and open. Here's where we get into chapter 2, the Hitchhikers' Guide to Taking Over the Galaxy. Now, the beginning of this chapter talks about people camping and lining up for the shows, which I find very ironic. But this chapter talks a lot about the aspect of live music and just how important the fans are into creating the success of the band. Tyler and Josh are fully aware that their success did not come from them alone. In fact, they are more likely to credit the fans for their success than them themselves. And this chapter digs a lot into the importance of live music, the importance of performing songs live to people, and having people respond to that music in real time. They also talked about their own first concerts, which was pretty sweet. Mine, if you wanted to know some Groovy Ghost lore for you, mine was Taylor Swift. I saw her in a place that she will never go again. That was Fearless Tour, and she has grown a lot since then. But Ryan also digs into this chapter of the importance and the significance of seeing 21 Pilots live. He dived into a thing that I have noticed before, which is very interesting. I think it happened a couple times, but to see my thoughts align with Ryan's was very, very interesting. But he mentioned that no matter how many people are watching 21 Pilots, they always bring the same energy. It doesn't matter if it's 2 people or 200,000 people, they will always perform the exact same. And Tyler even mentions that he does that because he wants to impact the people who are watching him. If one person can walk away from a show feeling like that music impacted them in some way, then Tyler feels like he had done his job. But this chapter takes place around the Blurryface era, so they talk about how there's new people suddenly showing up to the shows, and how there's kind of a fear of how those people will begin to understand the rules. I feel like this video puts it perfectly, but there is kind of like a weird politics to 21 Pilots. The book didn't really get into the politics side, but they did mention like, will new fans be able to keep up with the old fans? Will they know like you're supposed to hold Tyler and Josh up? You know, will they let them fall? Things like that. This chapter also dived into the crew dynamics and how they toured at the time. I didn't know this, but a lot of the crew members that they had, this was like their first job touring with a band. So they really didn't know if they were doing things right or wrong, which I love that. That's a cool vibe to have. Chapter 3 is 2 in a Million. And this chapter deals a lot with legacy, the idea of what lives on after us once we pass on, once we become a groovy ghost. And Tyler talks about in this chapter that his idea of legacy has changed. In the beginning, it was just wanting people to pay attention and maybe resonate with his music. But as things got bigger, he began to think about when he dies, what is going to live on after him, because music has the possibility of living on forever. The writer is mortal, but the art they create is immortal. It can live so much longer than the artist. And I think that this is a perfect chapter to talk about legacy, considering that this is the chapter where we talk about the writing process of Blurryface. Now, Ryan in the book even acknowledges that Blurryface might possibly be one of the most influential albums of that generation, and surely it is the most influential album of 21 Pilots. If anything, Blurryface is their legacy. And because of that, Blurryface brought in a lot of new fans and a boom of popularity. This chapter talks about dealing with that sudden boom in popularity. They are no longer these 2 kids touring in a van. They are becoming real celebrities, ooh. This chapter also talked about their home life and how they kind of deal with relationships while being on the road, and also kind of understanding that there are sacrifices to be made to have this life. There's a story in this where Josh talks about his first run-in with the paparazzi, and he said that it made him feel hollow, like a part of his soul was taken because of the paparazzi. And while he hated this interaction, he had an understanding of, this is the price I paid because I wanted this life. And it's this idea of willingly paying that price because they wanted this life. Another part that stood out to me in this chapter was the fact that Ryan said that Tyler's red beanie is the Tumblr equivalent of Michael Jackson's white glove. And I agree. That's all I'm going to say on that. But this chapter ends of being afraid of legacy, being afraid of what you're going to leave behind. And also this fear of, are you not living up to your potential? Are you not leaving a good enough legacy? Kind of those same fears and insecurities that Blurryface talks about. Chapter 4, Cancer. Now this was probably the most intimate and real chapter in the entire book. The author talks about how he lost his brother to cancer, and then eventually he finds his own tumor. He was told it wasn't cancerous, but there was no promises on if it would stay that way, and they couldn't do surgery to remove the tumor because of the placement. And the author really gets vulnerable here in sharing his mental state during that time of always being in the back of your mind of how much time do I have left? Is time running out for me? So for obvious reasons, the song Cancer by My Chemical Romance really resonated with Ryan. And because of the significance the Black Parade album had just on pop culture, Ryan figured he should start a project called Rock Sounds Presents The Black Parade. He shares a lot of his thought process behind this project, but he also dives into deciding which artist should cover which song. And he said one time he saw Tyler playing the piano and he thought that Cancer might be a good fit for him to cover. Now Ryan was a bit insecure with coming to the band's manager with this request. He quite honestly thought that they would just decline it and not worry about it. And even while they were working on the cover, he always thought in the back of his mind, like, they're just gonna walk away from this. Like, they're not gonna care that I want them to cover this song. But throughout this entire process of trying to get this project done, and also Ryan dealing with his own health issues, he says he felt like the band was there for him in a very strange way. He said that they honored and respected his request, and that spoke a lot of volumes about who they were as a person. Ryan also dives into the original song and the cover that Tyler did, which again was something that I picked up on, so it was very satisfying to see someone align with my thoughts. But he said Gerard's version was very angry. He was very much in denial of what was happening, versus Tyler's, who was much softer and much gentler. Where Gerard is unwilling to accept defeat, Tyler accepts it wholeheartedly. And honestly, I think that's the beauty of performing covers. I love when different artists sing the same song, because little changes like that, it like changes the entire song completely, even though they're singing the same words. But come to find it out, Ryan related more to Tyler's version of the song than Gerard's. He knew what it was like to feel fully defeated and to accept whatever was going to happen. But luckily, Ryan says that his tumor is not a problem, and he doesn't think about it much now, which is good, and I wish him the best with that. But he ends the chapter of leaving a message to the readers that is, be grateful that you have the power to change the future, even though you can't change the past. And it's important that you find something or someone to give you purpose, and to always be there for the people who love you, because people show their love in different ways, and sometimes that is through a song. Chapter 5 is titled Welcome to Trench. Now obviously by the title of this chapter we are talking about the Trench era, but this chapter also deals with the hiatus, which I was there for. I've been a clicky for a long time. I am a dinosaur. I lived the hiatus. It was not fun. And this chapter also talks about the fear that the band had of not knowing what's next. With Blurryface, Tyler had a pretty clear picture of what story he wanted to tell, but beyond that, he wasn't quite sure at the moment. And he did admit that the hiatus broke his heart, but he had this idea of he didn't just want to tell people that he was working on something, he wanted to show people that he was working on something. But he did mention that a hiatus would never happen again. But the book also mentions this weird refresh that the hiatus gave the band. Like, obviously Blurryface brought in a lot of fans. And this is not the book's words, but mine. But there's a lot of, you know, people jumping on the wagon. People who just want to be cool and edgy and not really care for the band. Because of the hiatus, Tyler and Josh were afraid of not anybody sticking around, but they knew that the people who did stick around genuinely cared for them, and that was their people. And I'm one of them. I am one of them. I am one of your people, Tyler and Josh. I stayed around for you. Eventually, Tyler came to the conclusion that this next album needed to explain who Blurryface was and where he came from. But with that came the frustrations of writing an album that came after Blurryface. Blurryface was this major success. How do you go about making another album after that cultural phenomenon? While Tyler didn't know the answer to that just yet, he did know that the album had to come directly from him, which again is something that I myself have always admired about this band. You know, if you look into the writing credits of most every song nowadays, there's just this list of all of these people, and you begin to start to think of like, is what this person's saying in the song actually coming from them? Do they actually mean what they're saying? And I never had that question with Tyler and Josh. Like, everything they say I know is coming directly from Tyler's mind, and he's saying exactly what he wants to say, and that makes me feel good. That makes me feel like I'm not listening to a liar. In this chapter, Tyler talks about your mind being a map, which of course was the foundations of Trench, because Trench is just a continent that looks like a brain. But Tyler talks about how there's areas in your mind that you go to, and there's areas in your mind that you try to avoid. This is what eventually led to Dima, Trench, all of that good stuff. And the book does actually do a small rundown of the lore, but not too intensely. It's just very basic stuff. And Ryan does give his review of Trench, which he praises greatly, but he also mentioned that Neon Gravestones is possibly one of the most important songs that 21 Pilots have ever written. And I agree with that. I know that one sparked some controversy, and there was a lot of people that said that they shouldn't put that one on the album, but I agree with that. Neon Gravestones is a lot. It's a lot. Chapter 6, 1 year into Trench. This chapter deals a lot with the aftermath of the hiatus and the aftermath of Trench, and this feeling of like, it worked out. I don't know how, it just worked out. And this also digs into the Bandido Tour as well. But it also deals with this theme of fear, the fear that the fans are not going to stick around forever. And also the fear of knowing that if Trench failed, it would be a direct representation of what Tyler had to offer as an artist. Because Tyler wrote Trench essentially by himself, yes, Paul Meany was involved, but he only did the technical stuff. The writing came from Tyler, so he thought that if this album failed, he would have failed as an artist. Which, I'm just gonna say it, Trench is one of the best albums that they've ever done. Neon Gravestones was pretty significant, but I'm gonna say, this is my own words, not Ryan's, that Jumpsuit is probably objectively like the most 21 Pilots song that ever 21 Pilots. I just feel like it's objectively their best song. I don't know. I love Jumpsuit, even though I'm a car radio stan. This chapter also talks about how the fans made Trench feel real to Tyler and Josh. That oftentimes when they're writing albums, a lot of it just feels like they're going through the motions, and it's kind of not real or like doesn't exist until the fans get a hold of it. Because of the audience's response, suddenly this album felt like a real, tangible thing and not something that existed in Tyler and Josh's mind. A story I found really curious about this chapter is Tyler actually thought that we were going to continue to wear red and black at the concerts. He was afraid that we were just going to reject this new album and Blurryface was still going to be the popular girl in town. But no, he said he was relieved when he showed up to the venue and everyone was wearing green and yellow. He took it as a sign that we were accepting the change and that we were along on this journey just as much as they were. Which, this is my own commentary here. I do feel like Bandido Tour was like the best when it comes to concert fits. I just saw so many people like coming up with their little Bandido OCs and things like that. I feel like as concert outfits go, I feel like Trench was like the most cohesive and collective we've ever been. Plus, Josh mentioned this in the book, but it's really cool because when you pull up to a Bandido tour and everyone's covered in duct tape, you automatically know that, this is for 21 Pilots. And I can't think of many bands that you see their fans and automatically know who they're there for, without looking at the band shirts, obviously, whatever. Going back to this idea of legacy, the book talks about the impact of music, and if music means something, then it'll always live forever. Chapter 7, The Battle for Greatness. Now, this deals a lot with COVID, quarantine, and the impact that those things had on live music. And apparently, Tyler had a bit of an identity crisis to this thing. Tyler bases a lot of his identity on not only being a writer, but being a performer. Because a part of him thought that live music was never coming back, he thought, who am I if I'm not performing music live? Which is probably a very scary situation to be in. This chapter also dives into the Skeld and Icy writing process, where Tyler talks about one of his favorite Bible stories, which is Apostle Paul. Paul, a lot like Tyler, and Tyler recognizes the similarities, was a storyteller. Paul's job was to travel and spread the word. Eventually, he finds himself in prison and he is unable to share his stories and travel and reach people. And this was kind of the situation Tyler found himself in while he was writing Skeld and Icy. Tyler says that Skeld and Icy was a prison he put himself in, much like Paul, to begin to learn more about himself. This chapter also dives into the quarantine life, Tyler suddenly being a dad, and Josh being married, how they dealt with those relationships during COVID, as well as level of concern, which was a direct request from Tyler's mom. But this chapter also digs into what the band wanted to be, their own identity, and this whole sort of thing. Obviously, Tyler and Josh are at the point now where they can work with a lot of powerful people and they can sell out if they wanted to. Do I lean into this big phenomenon that I'm now a part of? Do I make myself this huge rock star that people think I am? Or do I keep this simple and stay true to who I am and stay authentic and just write directly from myself? And this chapter also deals a lot with the creative process and how to write songs in quarantine, and how Tyler and Josh kind of had to relearn how to write music because of the separation during quarantine. And because of that, there were a lot of firsts for this album, which is oddly how Skeld and Icy got its sound. See, 21 Pilots are kind of known for having happy sounding songs and really depressing lyrics. That's kind of their thing. And we actually get an explanation for that in this book. Apparently it was not a conscious decision, but rather a result of Tyler just not knowing how to write music at the time. He said when he first started playing piano, he did not know any minor chords. He was playing all in major chords. Which, if you don't know anything about music theory, basically major chords sound happy. They make us feel good. They sound upbeat and whimsical and silly. Minor chords sound very scary. They are very sadder sounding. So because Tyler could only play in major chords, a lot of his songs sounded happy. And also the pre-recorded songs that keyboards came with all sounded happy because they all used major chords. Tyler got this impression of sad sounding songs were kind of forbidden. Like, you just didn't do that. You had to write a song that sounded happy. So to counteract that feeling, he had to make his lyrics very, very depressing. And so the classic sound of 21 Pilots was born. And so because there were so many firsts with Skeld and Icy, Tyler figured that he ought to pay tribute to his first time writing music by overly exaggerating that happy sound and depressing lyrics. This chapter also talked about Trash the Dragon, which is here with me somewhere. Let me get him. There he is, the boy. This album talks about being kind of putting yourself in a prison of you're no longer experiencing the world. There's no longer all of these influences. If you lock yourself in a small room, what can you draw inspiration from? And for Tyler, that was a tiny dragon. And he figured that if he put so much thought into a tiny toy dragon, that eventually it might come to life. And if he puts even further thought into it, the dragon might be able to help him escape his prison. Which, of course, as we know, Trash is very pivotal in helping Clancy and Torchbearer escape Dima. Brian then goes on to talk about neon gravestones and redecorate, and how they're very similar in themes and how important that theme is to 21 Pilots, even though we don't directly talk about it. And I'm not going to directly talk about it on this channel because I don't want YouTube to get mad at me. But if you know, you know. But there's also this very interesting moment in the book where Tyler wants every album to kind of be a reaction to the last, which he's talked about in interviews before. Trench had a very raw, angry sound, so in response to that, Scaled and Icy was a lot cleaner, a lot more polished, a lot more happy sounding. So every album is a direct reaction of the last. But Tyler also admits, even though he doesn't want it to be this way, every album is ultimately a response to Blurry Face. He's always kind of chasing after that one album in some way. This chapter also digs into the creation of the live stream event. Live streams were something that Tyler and Josh were initially against just because of how special their shows are when it comes to actually having an audience there. So they knew that when creating a live stream, they had to do something that wasn't just setting up a camera and playing songs. It had to be special. It had to kind of be a separate thing than a concert just being live streamed. And this eventually led into conversations about touring again after quarantine, as well as introducing the band into 21 Pilots. This section of the book also talks about how 21 Pilots became a two-piece. Apparently the bass player couldn't make it to a gig one time, so instead of canceling, it was just Tyler and Josh. And in that moment, they kind of understood of this is what the band should be. It should just be us two. These are my own thoughts, I should clarify, but it is very interesting, and I think Ryan does point this out a couple times in the book, but it's interesting of how things just work out for 21 Pilots. Like, there's moments where they just know. And I think that's really, really cool. So obviously introducing a band was something that they were also kind of fearful of because they pride themselves so much on being a two-piece band. But obviously it's not something the band regrets, and Tyler even mentions that he misses playing with them sometimes. Ryan also talks about a change that happened in Tyler after Scaled and Icy. He just changed as a person. He seems like a different man after Scaled and Icy. And Ryan can't help but wonder if the colorful, happy vibes and the cartoony dragon had any sort of appeal to Rosie. Rosie being Tyler Joseph's daughter. To which Tyler said if he was creating a story for Rosie to interpret and enjoy, he wasn't conscious of that decision. In fact, he said that he's honestly a little uncomfortable with his family watching him. He says he has come to the realization that he has to be two different people. One that is a dad to his children, and one is a performer, the person you see on stage. And while other family members are able to recognize those two Tylers, he doesn't think his children can, and he doesn't think it's fair for them to see two people, which is a very interesting aspect. I've never thought of it that way. We also get into some lore talks here. Ryan basically admits at this part in the chapter that he does not want to talk about the lore because he thinks that the fans that read the book know it a lot better than he does. He even talked about in the introduction that he wants this to be a book about 21 Pilots and not the book about 21 Pilots. And if there was the book about 21 Pilots, I would love for it to be lore centered. I would love for it to just explain everything start to finish. I would love a book like that. So if you're wanting a book that dives into the actual lore of 21 Pilots, this is not the one. But with that being said, Ryan does introduce an interesting aspect to this. He said that while the lore in the world that Tyler and Josh have created is fascinating and interesting, the thing that resonates with him the most is the human aspect of the band. It's easy to get lost in this fictional world that they have created, but it's almost more impressive to think about that they are just regular people. They are humans sharing their experiences, and to Ryan, that is more impactful than the fictional story that they have shared. Which I am guilty of that, and I do agree of that. I think some of us are so ready to make lore assumptions and lore connections, and we kind of forget that they are just two people, and I think we do kind of need to remember that this is coming from two real people, and two real people who are sharing a very real story. Near the end of this chapter, we get a realization from Tyler that the band is much bigger than his feelings. It's always fascinating for him to see the lives of fans and realize that they have their own lives outside of 21 Pilots, yet they always incorporate that into their lives. Now, this book only has 7 chapters, but at the very end it did say to be continued. So hopefully maybe another book, maybe more interviews. We'll have to see what that means. But the end section of this book was called From the Vault, and it was basically a little collection of random interviews and conversations. There was one part that was just a list of fun facts. The rest of this section was just a question and answer type format. Overall, I think Ryan captured the phenomenon and the feelings of the 21 Pilots fan base perfectly. When I first heard that this book was not coming from the band and coming from an outsider, you're always kind of suspicious of how they'll handle this phenomenon. Because I think a lot of times outsiders see the clickies and just want to write them off as crazy, obsessed fans. And sure, you can say we're crazy because we kind of are. Well, we are. But there is so much more than just being crazy fans, and the fact that Ryan was able to not only see that, but to articulate it was very, very interesting. I feel like he handled the phenomenon with respect, when it could have just been so easy to be like, yeah, the 21 Pilot fans are crazy. There was also this overarching theme of humility, that Tyler and Josh are not able to recognize just how great they are, and they're almost kind of in straight up denial of their success. Now, me, myself, I have never met Tyler and Josh, but the things that I have heard from people who have met them have nothing but great things to say about them. And again, it's this idea of them being humble. Actually, fun fact, the Guitar Center where Josh used to work and also where he learned the drums, I ran into unexpectedly one day, and I just so happened to have a 21 Pilot shirt on, as I mostly do in life. And one of the employees, he was an older man, he said, "Do you know who used to work here?" And I didn't come there intentionally, but when he said that, it kind of clicked in my brain, and I was like, Josh Dunn? Then the next 20-minute long conversation was basically stories about Josh working at the Guitar Center because that employee had worked with Josh. And I remember him saying that fame couldn't have happened to a more deserving person, that Josh was genuinely a nice, down-to-earth guy. And while sure, you should never meet your heroes, I think it's always kind of reassuring to hear people say that, your heroes are good people and not giant jerks, because who wants to look up to giant jerks? Not me. If you are a fan of 21 Pilots, I cannot recommend this book enough. Not only do you get an insight into Tyler and Josh's mind, I think it definitely reminds you of what's important and what's special about the 21 Pilots phenomenon. In a time where there's so much drama and so much fighting, I think we do need to read this and be reminded of what's actually important, and it's not barricade at a 21 Pilots concert. There were times where I was reading this and I felt emotional, which is a major deal because I am practically soulless, just because of the fact that I have been with this band since I have been 13 years old, and to have someone articulate and to read words off a page that perfectly describe who I've felt for so many years, it felt really special. For those of you who aren't fans of 21 Pilots, I still suggest checking out this book, especially if you are into the process of being a musician and the process of creating music, because there was a lot of that in this book. I think even if you're not a crazy fan about 21 Pilots, if you want to know more about what it is to be an artist, about what it's like to live as a musician, I definitely suggest checking this out, because I think in response to how honest Tyler and Josh are, Ryan himself was very honest, and he did not sugarcoat anything about the writing process of these albums and the history of the band. There was so much honesty. There was so much openness about the struggles and the fears that are very real within not only 21 Pilots, but just being a musician in general. But it also celebrated the successes of being a musician. So yeah, that was my entire review of this book. If you liked the video, please hit like and subscribe. And as always, I will see you in the next one.